Hey guys, Drifter here. Welcome to Black Ops Cold War in Depth. In today's episode, we're going to be reviewing the R1 Shadowhunter Crossbow, which is a very fun weapon, in my opinion, that isn't bad, but isn't as good as other Treyarch crossbows. You're going to get to see some good gameplay with it here today. It might end up looking like a better weapon than it is, but traditionally, or historically speaking, Treyarch has made some very strong crossbows, explosive tips, able to spam, infinite ranges, stuff like that. This one is not as good as those, but it is still fun, and it's still not a terrible weapon. I will say it's pretty rough in Warzone, though. It's not going to be a very good weapon in Warzone, but we'll talk about why later. For now, let's talk about how to unlock the crossbow. You can unlock it for free via in-game challenges. You only need to get one shot, one kill medals 3 times across 15 different games. So effectively, you need to snipe 3 people in 15 different games. Don't quit out mid-game or they'll stop tracking. Or if you want to, if you don't want to do that, you can buy the blueprint directly out of the store for, I believe it's 1,800 CoD points. If you're going to go that way and get the blueprint, be sure to use creator code DRIFTOR. It has to be in all caps and the O is a 0, thus making this video sponsored by Activision. So it's kind of your choice. You can grind 15 games or you can throw some money at it immediately to buy it. That's all of that discussion. Let's talk about the actual stats and performance of the weapon. It deals 150 damage per arrow, and it deals the same amount of damage for every body region hit to the best of my ability to test. It seems to deal 150 damage for headshots, arm shots, leg shots, knee shots, every kind of shot you can imagine. It seems to deal 150 damage. That means it'll one-shot kill anyone as long as it hits, except for enemies with armor. Armor gives you a damage resistance, so you have effectively over 150. You will break the armor, you will hurt an armor user a lot, but you won't kill them. Thankfully, you don't run into too many of these in public matches, so for the most part, you should expect a one-shot, one-kill for any enemy that you hit in any region, so there's no need to go for headshots or any special regions. In Warzone, to the best of my ability to tell, it deals 150 damage as well. It does seem to have a bigger headshot multiplier in Warzone, thus kind of ensuring the one-shot, one-kill down. However, this is incredibly difficult to test because the bots that you would normally do to test a weapon against just don't have enough health for me to guarantee that I'm getting the full value out of the damage. A lot of times I shoot an enemy that only has 100 health, and that's what it registers as. But for the most part, you're not going to be getting one-shot kills with the weapon, and that's the most important thing to know. The crossbow arrow velocity is 110 meters per second. You will have problems with moving targets. This is fairly slow. This is maybe double the speed of the tomahawk, about 30-40% more than a lot of the throwables in the game, but way slower. Even the slowest bullet velocity will be twice this fast. So if people are running really fast, you're side to side, you might have some difficulty hitting them. However, oddly, you don't have to arc your shots up very much. The crossbow doesn't have a whole lot of arrow drop. You would normally call it bullet drop, but it seems to be oddly sighted at about 50 meters. And what that means is I made this amazing little infographic for you. The weapon seems to be sighted like a real weapon to where it's actually going to shoot up just a little bit. So it's going to be effectively almost perfectly straight up to about 50 meters. It'll go up in a little arc and then land almost exactly wherever you're aiming it because of how it's been sighted. This is something that you used to have to fiddle with in PUBG and DayZ and games like that, and they just kind of automatically did it here. Interestingly, 50 meters is how I have my AR-15 set up for home defense because that's the range I'm going to be using it at. And yeah, I did actually have an intruder lined up with the AR-15 recently, but that's going to be a different story for a different video in the future. For now, what you really need to know is that if you're thinking that it looks like your bolts are going up a little bit, you're not crazy, they are. And what that means for you is that you don't actually have to aim up higher than your enemy or calculate bullet drop for almost any reasonable sane distance of the crossbow. It's pretty much going to be straightforward. Yes, at extreme ranges there will be drop and you'll have to compensate for it, but not very much. The R1 Shadowhunter's rate of fire is about 26 rounds per minute, or about half of that of most of the sniper rifles in this game. It must be reloaded after every single shot, which can be brutal and is by far the biggest downside to using this weapon. The reload time in question is 2.3 seconds, which is not terrible, but it will feel bad. It'll especially feel bad when you run into a cluster of enemies. You shoot one of them with the first arrow, the buddy notices, and he just has time to turn around and kill you before you can even put the second arrow in. My best tip and strategy is to be kind of close to a corner so you can shoot and then pull around the corner really fast. You want to hug those corners and use them for cover because you're going to be extremely vulnerable while your crossbow is down. I also carry a tomahawk for backup, which functions pretty similarly in that kind of distance. When it comes to the attachments on the weapon, there are no attachments. There's no stocks, no lasers, no extra explosive tip bolts or anything cool like that. No tri-shot. All you have are optical attachments, just a couple of different choices of red dot that's available in Black Ops Cold War. And personally, I like the iron sights better than any optics. The way they put the optics on the weapon, the iron sights still come up and get in the way of what you're looking at, even though you have a dot. They kind of touch and overlap with the dot. And in my opinion, that's more annoying than just using the iron sights, which are already pretty good. So for the most part, I don't use dot sights and just use the basic optics. R1 Shadowhunter handling stats in milliseconds is 833 milliseconds for aim down sights time. I put a little asterisk on that because that's for the full complete animation and not really your effective aim down sights time. Sprint out time is 167 milliseconds, which is anomalous in this game. So the short version of this is you can fire before the full ADS animation completes, because that is a very slow ADS animation for a weapon that requires precise timing, but you risk inaccuracy. It's accurate before the animation is done, and there's a little timing, a little mastery you'll have to put into it, but it's not very hard. What you should really focus on, though, is that sprint out time. The sprint out time is insanely fast. It is clearly designed for rushing and hipfire. This is like one of the fastest sprint out time weapons in the game, except for some of the pistols. You can sprint right up into people's faces and put arrows in them before they can even raise their guns. And that's probably one of the strongest suits of the weapon, is its hipfire, not only for that speed, but the R1 Shadowhunter hipfire is extremely tight in general. Matter of fact, it's so tight, I generally prefer hipfiring over aim down sights. I don't aim down sights unless my enemy is pretty far away, or unless I know that they're not going to be moving a whole lot. For anything up to maybe even 20 meters, I'm probably just going to hipfire people and keep moving. Hipfiring this weapon is 100% the way to go. It's why it's a secondary. That's what it's made for. You're supposed to swap to it and just hipfire one person and make them die. One thing I did want to point out is that melee seems oddly slow and clunky with this weapon. That's sort of a subjective thing. To be fair, I haven't measured all of the melee speeds of all the weapons, but when using it, it feels like if I miss my shot and go for melees, it does feel very slow on the follow-up hit. The animation and the speed is not very swift, so that can be problematic if you think it's just going to be easy to go in and slap people around with your bow. Got a couple of questions here that a lot of you are going to want to ask. Number one, does it show up on radar when you shoot? Nope, it does not show up on radar, at least not in my testing, which means it is a stealth weapon. Now, people will hear you shooting it. They'll hear the bolts whizzing past them or hitting the wall near them or something like that, but you will not show up as a little dot on the radar, so it'll work really well with a stealth class of some kind. The next question is, can you retrieve the bolts from dead enemies? You don't get very many to start with, and the answer is yes. You run over an enemy, you'll pick up the bolt. You can also completely refill your situation with Scavenger. Scavenger in this weapon is just the way to go. You can spam as many bolts as you want. As long as you kill one person, you run over them, and you're almost refilled. Scavenger is going to be your friend if you're going for camos or challenges or just fun gameplay with the R1 Shadowhunter. In my opinion, the Shadowhunter is not good enough to be a true primary weapon. The reload times are just too slow. It makes it very difficult to get multi-kills, to clear out rooms of people, to do anything other than just pick one person, go hide, reload, and then pick another person over and over and over again. The other Treyarch crossbows had explosive tips. They had tri-bolts. The ones in Black Ops 3 you could just spam really, really fast, the little akimbo ones. This one's just too slow. You only get your one shot, and if you miss your one shot, you're very, very screwed. So I do not think it's good enough to be a primary. However, it's still actually very powerful in close quarters combat. There's nothing like insta-killing people, and I would actually say that this is probably more reliable for insta-killing than most of the shotguns in this game. It is very fun to use. It's very satisfying to use. You feel skilled. You feel like a ninja, a master, whatever. So it might not actually be a bad backup weapon. If you don't like the pistols in this game, you don't run the Lawbreaker, so you have two primaries, and if you're having some issues with shotguns being unreliable, Well, this one is going to be a good backup weapon. You can draw it relatively quickly, you can hipfire it and insta-kill one person, and it's pretty good in that regard. Also very good for showing off with. And one of the added bonuses of the weapon is that if you do happen to hit a sniper with one, you'll pretty much tilt them off the face of the earth. When people get counter-sniped with bow and arrow, they don't like that. They start playing very irrationally. Finally, at the end of the episode, we'll have a little discussion about Warzone. The R1 Shadowhunter has better range than the Modern Warfare 2019 crossbow, in that the bullet drop or arrow drop is not as distinct. Even if the arrow velocity might actually be a little bit slower, it just doesn't seem to fall as fast for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why. So that's a really nice attribute, and you would think that that's good because then you can actually like snipe or use it like a marksman rifle. But the weapon doesn't seem to one-shot kill against full armor enemies in Warzone unless it's a headshot. This was difficult for me to test. I did it in private matches, as you've seen some of the gameplay of, and some in Plunder, as you've seen gameplay of. In a lot of those matches, people do not have the full 250 plates. However, the enemies that I found that were well positioned and sniping and stuff that I did nail with the crossbow simply got an armor break and did not die. I'm assuming that is a 250 plate enemy. However, every single person, regardless of their situation, when I hit them in the head, did die. So I think you have to get headshots to kill with this in Warzone. However, it doesn't have any special bolts. It doesn't have any good attachments. It doesn't do anything special. It's just kind of like a worse version of the Modern Warfare 2019 crossbow. So when it comes right down to it, I think the Modern Warfare crossbow provides a lot more utility, even if the bolts do require more like leading and aiming. I do not think the Shadowhunter is going to be very good or viable in Warzone in any capacity. Guys, that is all for this episode of Black Ops Cold War in Depth. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.